At 20 to 3 in the morning, Cassian Vitali walked into his own house and stopped dead at the edge of the Great Hall. He'd come home 2 days early. Nobody knew. The place should have been dark and silent, the way it had been every night for 14 months. But the chandelier was burning low, and there on the rug in the middle of that cold marble floor, a woman he couldn't have named was kneeling with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, stacking colored wooden blocks into a tower. Sitting across from her was Delaney, his sister, 19 years old. The girl 9 of the best doctors in the country hadn't gotten a single word out of in over a year. Delaney set a yellow block on top. The tower leaned. It fell, and Delaney laughed. Not a breath, not a reflex. A real laugh, rough at the edges from going unused so long. The woman didn't cheer or clap or turn around looking for someone to tell. She just picked the block back up, pressed it into Delaney's hand, and said something so quiet he almost missed it. Again, there's no rush. Cassian stood in the dark by the door and didn't move. 34 years old, 2 shipping terminals, 9 hotels, a last name people in Chicago lower their voices to say. He'd spent a fortune on specialists. Not one of them had ever done what was happening on his rug at 20 to 3 in the morning. Then he looked up. On the staircase landing stood Camille Sutcliffe, the woman who'd run his household for 20 years, in a red dress, one hand clamped hard over her mouth. Cassian thought she was moved. He was wrong about that, and it would cost him more than he could imagine to find out how wrong. By 5 the next morning, the woman on the rug was gone. On the library table sat a ring of house keys and a sheet of paper folded once. 6 words, pressed into the page so hard the pen had almost torn through. No name, no explanation. And Cassian Vitali, a man who'd spent 15 years knowing exactly who was standing in every room he walked into, realized he had no idea who he'd just let walk out of his. If this story's got you already, hit that like button and share it with someone who'd want to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss a minute. Now let's go back to that rug, and to the 6 words she left behind. Rowan Pike arrived at the library at 7 o'clock, and the first thing he noticed was that his employer was still wearing the same clothes from the night before. Cassian stood beside the window with his back turned, a cup of coffee that had long gone cold in his hand, and he didn't turn around when Rowan entered. Someone was in the house last night around 3 in the morning, Cassian said. A woman. I want to know who she is. Rowan opened his tablet, typed a few lines, then stopped for longer than necessary. Josephine Marlowe, he read. Night shift housekeeper. Started working here last summer. Her shift runs from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, 6 days a week. How long has she worked here? Almost a year, sir. Cassian turned around. Almost a year. Not a single late arrival. Not one unscheduled absence. Not one complaint from management. Rowan scrolled further down the screen. And this morning, Mrs. Sutcliffe recorded that she terminated her contract at 4:15. She didn't accept her final month's pay. Cassian placed the coffee cup on the table. It made a dry sound against the wooden surface. Didn't accept her pay. Yes, sir. The payroll records are clear. She signed a refusal. There was a moment when Cassian said nothing, and Rowan, who had stood beside him for nearly 10 years, knew exactly what that moment meant. It meant his employer had just encountered a piece of information that didn't fit anywhere inside the system he had always used to understand the world. People didn't leave money behind. In the world Cassian Vitali had grown up in, people could abandon many things, their honor, their promises, even their own family, but no one walked away from money they had earned. What does she look like? He asked. Rowan hesitated. Would you like me to open her personnel file? I want you to tell me what she looks like. Rowan fell silent. Then he answered, honestly as always, which was the reason he had managed to keep his position for so long. I don't remember, sir. Cassian slowly nodded. He walked toward the end of the room, where a staff board hung behind a wooden door, something he had passed by every day without ever stopping to read. More than 40 names. His eyes moved down each line, and when he finished, he realized something that made his throat tighten. He could remember the faces of fewer than a quarter of them. He paid every one of them. He paid for their homes, for their children's meals, for the rides that brought them here while the sky was still dark, and he didn't know what they looked like. He summoned Camille Sutcliffe at 7:30. She arrived within 4 minutes, her hair already neatly pinned up, her arms holding the morning files the same way she had every day for the past 20 years. "You're back early," she said. "I should have prepared the room." "Josephine Marlowe," Cassian said. Camille didn't blink. "She resigned last night." "Family reasons. It's common for that position, Mr. Vitale. People come and go, especially on the night shift. I'll find a replacement this week." "She didn't take her final month's pay. Some people are uncomfortable with the paperwork," she answered smoothly, without missing a beat. "I tried to convince her to stay. She was determined to leave." "You tried to convince her?" "Of course. Good workers are hard to find." Cassian looked at her. He had sat across from men who could lie without their heartbeat changing, and he knew the true signs were never found in someone's voice. They appeared in the moments when people forgot they were being watched. "Thank you," he said. Camille nodded, turned around, and walked out. Cassian watched her. At the exact moment her hand touched the doorknob, the fingers holding the file tightened around it, squeezing so hard that the edges of the papers curled upward. Only for a second. Then she left and closed the door with almost no sound. Cassian remained standing there for a long time afterward. "Rowan," he called. The other man stepped inside. "All camera footage from the house for the last 2 weeks. Back it up onto a separate drive for me. Don't put it through the main system. Don't send it through anyone else." Rowan didn't ask why. "Yes, sir. And Rowan." He stopped at the doorway. "Don't let Mrs. Sutcliffe know about this." When he was alone again, Cassian returned to the library table. The set of keys was still there, arranged neatly, perfectly aligned with the edge of the table, the kind of order created by someone who was used to cleaning up after others. Beside it was a folded piece of paper. He opened it for the 4th time since before dawn. 6 words. The handwriting had been pressed down so hard that the marks had risen on the back of the paper like a scar. He read it again, then folded it along the exact old creases, placed it inside his wallet, and pushed it into the innermost compartment where he kept the only photograph he had left of his father. He didn't know why he did it. He only knew that there were some things people couldn't throw away, even when they still didn't understand what those things truly meant. The address in the personnel file led him to a 3-story building in South Lawndale, with a laundromat on the ground floor that was still glowing even though it was already past noon, the glass doors fogged with steam, and a metal staircase along the side of the building leading directly to the 2nd floor. Cassian drove there himself. He didn't bring Rowan, didn't call ahead, and parked his car on a street where the vehicle was worth more than all the others combined. He climbed the metal stairs, each step making a different sound beneath his feet, and knocked on apartment number 7. The door was opened by a boy around 10 years old, his hair sticking up on one side from just waking up, a worn subway route map clutched in his hand. The boy looked him up and down, then said with the seriousness of someone who had dealt with this situation many times before, "Are you the landlord?" "My sister already paid this month's rent. I have the receipt too." Cassian opened his mouth, then closed it again. In 15 years he had walked into countless rooms, and never once had he been stopped by a sentence like that. "I'm looking for your sister," he said. "Beck," a voice called from inside. "Come back in here." The boy shrugged, turned around and disappeared behind the doorway with the map still tucked beneath his arm. Josephine Marlowe appeared where the boy had been standing. She was wearing a gray sweater, her hair tied back hastily, and she held a roll of tape in her hand. Behind her, in the middle of the small apartment, 3 cardboard boxes sat open, one filled with books, one filled with clothes, and the third only lined at the bottom. She looked at him, and Cassian waited for the reaction he was used to seeing. The small step backward, the lowered eyes, the sudden quietness in someone's voice. It never came. She simply stood there, still holding the roll of tape, and said, "You shouldn't have come here. You left at 4:15 in the morning and didn't take your pay. I know what time I left. Why? Family reasons. That's what Mrs. Sutcliffe told me, word for word." Something flashed across her face for a brief moment, then disappeared. "Then I guess that's the truth," she said. He stepped forward once, no more, and stopped at the doorway because she hadn't invited him inside. "My sister laughed," he said. "Last night, on the carpet in my house." "She hasn't done that since my father died." Josie didn't answer. "I've paid the best people in this country," he continued, and he heard his own voice losing the calmness he had always been proud of. "One after another. Not a single one of them could do what you did in 40 minutes on my floor. So you're going to come back, and you're going to tell me how much you want." I'm not coming back. You haven't heard the number. I don't need to. She placed the roll of tape down on the box. Mr. Vitali, I know you're used to everything having a price, but there are some things people walk away from not because they don't need money. He was about to speak again when heavy footsteps sounded on the metal staircase, and a man around 60 years old appeared, holding a notice in his hand. He didn't even look at Cassian. This weekend, Ms. Marlowe. I've told you 3 times already. Someone else is paying more. You promised I could stay until the end of the month. I changed my mind. Cassian looked at the notice in the man's hand, then at the 3 cardboard boxes behind Josie, then toward the bedroom door where the boy had disappeared, and in that moment he understood why she was packing her things. She wasn't moving because she had found somewhere better. Excuse me, he said, and stepped into the hallway. He took out his phone, dialed a number, and spoke for about 40 seconds, his voice steady, no louder than the sound of the washing machines echoing from the floor below. Then he hung up and waited. 2 minutes later, the man's phone rang. He listened, and Cassian watched the color drain and shift across his face with every sentence he heard. When the man ended the call, his hand was trembling slightly. This building just changed ownership, Cassian said. You're still managing it the same way, still collecting rent the same way. The only difference is that now you're collecting it for me. And no one in this building gets thrown out before their lease ends. Not the 3rd floor. Not even the people you're planning to rent to someone else. Is that clear? The man nodded several times, shoved the notice into his coat pocket, and hurried down the stairs faster than he had climbed them. Cassian turned back. He waited for a thank you. Josie stood in the doorway, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet but completely clear. You just did the exact thing I was afraid of. He didn't understand yet. Before today, I was just someone whose name you didn't remember, she said. Now I'm someone who owes you something. Do you know the difference? Her eyes stayed on him. Someone who owes a debt doesn't get to say no. Then she closed the door, very gently, exactly the way Camille Sutcliffe had closed the library door that morning, and Cassian stood alone in the metal hallway with the steady sound of washing machines turning beneath his feet. Cassian didn't return the next day, nor the day after that. He went back to the estate, sat in the library throughout the afternoon, and thought about the last sentence Josie had spoken before closing the door. Someone who owes a debt doesn't get to say no. He had spent his entire life creating people like that. It was how he had built everything, and for the first time, he saw it placed directly in front of him like an accusation. On the 3rd night, he went upstairs. Della was sitting by the window in the armchair where she had spent nearly all of the past 14 months, the worn teddy bear named Pip resting on her lap, her eyes facing outside but seeing nothing. Cassian sat down on the edge of the bed. He didn't know how to begin. He had never had to begin with his sister before. In the past, Della was always the one who started, talking endlessly from the time she was 7 years old, talking through meals, talking even when no one was listening. I found her, he said. Della didn't turn around. She lives in South Lawndale. She has a younger brother. She won't come back. Still, there was nothing. Then, very slowly, Della lifted the teddy bear from her lap and placed it on the chair beside her, carefully, facing the door. Cassian looked at the gesture, and it took him a moment to understand. She was leaving a place for someone. The next morning, he had the car brought out at 9 o'clock, and in the back seat sat his sister, wearing a long coat, her arms wrapped around Pip, while the nurse sitting in the front recorded something on the medical chart. The entire drive, Della didn't move. But when the car turned onto the street with the laundromat, her head lifted. Cassian saw it through the rearview mirror, and he said nothing, didn't dare say anything. The car stopped. He walked around to open the door and reached out to help his sister, but Della had already placed her foot onto the sidewalk before he could touch her. She stood upright. She looked toward the metal staircase, and then she walked. Not quickly, not steadily, every step carrying a breath of effort, but she crossed that entire concrete courtyard on her own feet, and the nurse behind her let out a small sound before immediately falling silent. At the top of the stairs, the door to apartment number 7 opened. Josie stepped out carrying a trash bag, and she froze when she looked down. The bag slipped from her hand. Della stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up, and opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She tried again. Cassian watched his sister's throat move, saw the immense struggle taking place inside a body that had known only silence for 14 months, and he couldn't breathe. Then 2 syllables came out, broken, distorted. The second sound nearly disappeared before it could fully form. But it was a name, and everyone standing in that courtyard heard clearly whose name it was. Josie ran down the stairs, almost falling. She dropped to her knees on the concrete floor, wrapped her arms around Della, and cried the way people cry when they have held something inside for far too long, without sound, with only her shoulders trembling and her hands gripping tightly onto the girl's coat. Della didn't cry. Della simply stood there, her arms around Josie's shoulders, and repeated those 2 syllables again, a little clearer this time. Cassian stood several steps away and didn't move closer. He remembered the day the hospital called him, remembered the doctor who had told him that sometimes language never returns, that families should prepare themselves for that possibility. He had paid for that sentence. He had paid for all those sentences. And not one of them was worth as much as the 2 syllables that had just echoed through a concrete courtyard in South Lawndale. When Josie finally looked up, her eyes red and her face wet with tears, she looked at Cassian, and he could see clearly that she still hadn't forgiven him for the building. "I will come back," she said. "But listen carefully. I'm not coming back because of you, and I'm not coming back because of that building. I'm coming back because of her." Cassian nodded. "I know." Josie stood up, brushed the dust from her knees, then turned toward Della and did something he would remember for the rest of his life. She didn't take the girl's hand. She simply held out her own hand and waited, allowing Della to decide for herself whether she wanted to take it or not. Josie returned to the night shift as before, but this time Cassian asked for something that had never happened in that house. He wanted to sit with them. She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Fine. But there are 3 things you need to remember, and if you can't do them, then you would be better off standing in the hallway." He nodded. "First, don't correct the way she pronounces things. Never. She knows when she says something wrong. She hears more clearly than you think, and every time you correct her, she will choose silence because it's easier. Second, don't speak for her. If she stops in the middle of a sentence, you let her stop. You might have to wait a very long time, so long that you feel like you can't stand it anymore, but that sentence has to belong to her. Third, don't praise her too much. Don't clap, don't celebrate, don't say good job. She's 19 years old, not a child, and nothing makes someone feel more seriously ill than being praised for things they used to do without anyone ever noticing." Cassian was silent for a while. "Then what do I do?" "You sit there. That's all?" "That's all." She picked up the box of wooden blocks from the table, the box that the rehabilitation doctor had prescribed last winter to help train the fine movements of Della's right hand, the thing he had always assumed was just useless equipment sitting untouched in a cabinet all this time. "People always think helping means doing things for someone else," Josie said. With her, helping means waiting. On the first night, Cassian could barely endure it. He knelt on the carpet in the grand foyer, his tie hanging over his shoulder because it kept getting caught on his sleeve, and he sat there watching his sister turn a blue wooden block over and over in her palm for nearly 10 minutes without putting it down. Every instinct inside him screamed that he needed to do something. He was the man who could settle a harbor dispute with one phone call, the man who could make a building change ownership in 2 minutes, and he couldn't stand watching his sister struggle with a wooden block. He reached out his hand. Josie didn't say anything. She only looked at him. He pulled his hand back. The block was finally placed down, crookedly, and the tower collapsed. Della let out a breath, then started again. 40 minutes. That was how long he sat on the floor of his own home that night doing nothing, and when he finally stood up, his back hurt, his knees were numb, and he realized he had just endured 40 minutes more difficult than any negotiation he had ever sat through. On the 4th night, Della spoke 3 words in a row. Cassian didn't clap. He simply picked up the wooden block that had fallen and placed it back into his sister's hand, exactly the way he had watched Josie do. And he heard Della laugh softly, the same sound he had stood outside the door and secretly listened to on that first night. On the 7th night, when the clock had passed 3 in the morning and Della was asleep, Josie went downstairs to turn off the hallway lights. She passed the library door and stopped. The door was open. Cassian was asleep in the large armchair in the corner of the room, still wearing his shirt, his head tilted to one side, and the chair was positioned facing the hallway. Not facing the window, not facing the fireplace, facing the hallway so he could see the staircase. Josie stood there for a while. She had worked in many homes, and she knew how to read a room, and this room told her that the man had not slept in his own bedroom for a very long time. She didn't ask. She didn't ask that night, and she didn't ask on any night afterward. She simply went upstairs, took a wool blanket from the linen closet, came back down, and placed it over the edge of the chair, not covering him, just leaving it there. Then she turned off the hallway light and left. The next morning, when she finished her shift at 6 o'clock, the blanket had been folded neatly and placed over the arm of the chair. He didn't say anything to her about it. The next evening she left it there again, and the morning after that it was folded again. It continued that way for many weeks, without a single word exchanged, like a conversation both of them were taking part in, and neither of them would admit existed. The night Josie finally told him was a rainy one, when Della had gone to sleep earlier than usual, and the two of them sat together in the kitchen, with 2 cups of tea that neither of them touched. Cassian asked the question he had asked her in South Lawndale, but this time he asked it differently. He didn't ask why she left, he asked who had made her leave. Josie wrapped her hands around the cup for a long time before she finally spoke. It happened 3 weeks before the night he came home early. Camille Sutcliffe had summoned her to the estate office at 11 o'clock at night, the hour when the entire house was asleep and everyone knew it was a time when no one moved around. She sat behind the desk, the lamp turned on, her hands folded together. She didn't raise her voice. Josie said that was the thing she remembered most clearly, that throughout the entire conversation, Mrs. Sutcliffe's voice was as calm as if she were discussing the laundry schedule for the curtains. She said Josie did good work. She said she had been watching her for months, and she admitted that Josie possessed something that people paid many times more than her didn't have. Then she opened a drawer, took out a pre-printed administrative form, and placed it across the desk, turning it exactly the right way so Josie could read it. She didn't explain what the form was. She didn't need to. Josie had worked as a caregiver long enough to recognize a document simply by the way it was arranged, and she understood from the very first line. Every box had already been filled in. There was only one empty space left at the bottom of the page. Camille took out a pen from the drawer and placed it beside the paper, perfectly straight, parallel to the edge of the desk. "You leave here before 6 o'clock in the morning," she said, "and I won't have to use this." Josie said she stood there for a very long time. She said she thought about arguing, about asking why, even about tearing the paper apart right in front of her, and then she realized all those thoughts were meaningless, because the paper was only a printed form, and Mrs. Sutcliffe could print another one any morning she wanted. What lay on the desk wasn't the paper. What lay on the desk was the 20 years she had spent standing inside that house, the names she knew, the doors she could open, and the ones Josie couldn't. "I stood there and I asked myself only one question," Josie said. "If I stayed, could I be certain I would protect both of them?" Cassian didn't ask what came next. He already knew the answer. "I have a younger brother," she said. "He only has me. There is no one else in the world for him. If I make the wrong choice, he is the one who pays for it, and he has never done anything to deserve paying for my choices." She took a sip of the tea that had already gone cold. "And Della has an entire family. She has doctors, nurses, a home. I kept telling myself that she would be fine. I repeated that sentence to myself all the way home that night, and I knew I was lying." Cassian looked down at the table. The boy had never known any of this. Josie had taken care of it. He only knew that his sister had changed jobs, that there were some days when she came home earlier, and that the next morning he still had toast for breakfast like every other morning. "Why didn't you tell me?" Cassian asked. "You could have knocked on the library door at any time." Josie gave a laugh, a very short laugh with no happiness in it. "Mr. Vitale, do you know what happens when someone who cleans floors reports the estate manager? She has been here for 20 years. I hadn't even been here for a year. She signs my paychecks. She writes my evaluations. She is the person who decides who gets to enter your sister's room and who doesn't." She placed the cup down. "Who would you have believed?" Cassian opened his mouth and realized he didn't have a decent answer. He knew exactly who he had believed for the past 14 months. He had believed the reports placed on his desk every Monday morning. He had believed the woman who carried them in. He had believed so completely that he had never once gone upstairs to verify anything himself. "I'm sorry," he said. Josie shook her head. "I didn't tell you this to hear you apologize. I told you because now I have come back, And if you still intend to let her keep the keys to every door in this house, then you should know beforehand that next time she won't use paper." Outside the window, the rain continued falling steadily across the courtyard. Cassian sat there in silence for a long time, and inside his mind, something had begun to move, slowly and coldly, the way it always moved before he made a decision that would require someone else to pay the price. Josie stood up from the kitchen table, walked outside, and returned a few minutes later with a blue-covered notebook whose corners were bent, the kind sold at the checkout counters of convenience stores. The edges of the pages thickened from being turned too many times. She placed it in front of Cassian. "I started writing things down during the 4th week," she said. "Not because I suspected anyone, only because I noticed something didn't add up. And when I notice something doesn't add up, I write it down. An old habit." Cassian opened it. The handwriting was small even, with not a single word crossed out. Each page was divided into 2 columns. The column on the left contained dates, times, and a very brief description. The column on the right, written in different ink, contained sentences copied from the weekly reports. He read the first entry and looked up. "What is this?" "Just keep reading." One late autumn night, close to 4 in the morning, Della walked the entire length of the 2nd-floor hallway by herself, from her bedroom door to the window at the end of the hall and back again, without holding onto the wall, without a cane, without anyone supporting her. In the right column, the report from that week stated that the patient required full assistance with mobility. Cassian read it again to make sure he hadn't mistaken the 2 columns. He turned the page. One night in the middle of winter, Della held a pen and wrote her name on the back of an old calendar page, writing slowly, writing it 3 times until the letters became straight. The report from that week stated that the patient had lost functional writing ability. He turned another page. One night at the beginning of spring, Della spoke 5 separate words over the course of an hour. The report from that week stated that no meaningful speech had been observed. The next page, Della removed and put on her own coat without assistance. The report stated that she was completely dependent for personal care. Cassian turned the pages faster, and he realized his hands were moving faster, so he stopped, placed the notebook on the table, and sat upright. "How many pages like this are there?" "Count them yourself." He didn't count. He didn't need to. He had already seen the most frightening thing inside that blue notebook, and it wasn't the fact that the reports were wrong. Any system could have mistakes. Anyone who had ever managed a large organization knew that paperwork always drifted away from reality by some amount. But mistakes went in both directions. There should have been at least a few pages where the reports made things seem better than they really were, where they claimed his sister had done something she actually hadn't done. There wasn't a single page like that, not one. Every discrepancy in that blue-covered notebook moved in the same direction, and that direction was the worse one. "When did you realize this?" he asked, and he heard that his voice had changed. Josie pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Before I became a housekeeper, I was a caregiver," she said. "Night shifts, in patient transport. I was almost finished with nursing school when my mother became sick and I had to quit. But I spent enough time in hospitals to know what a record looks like when it's written correctly, and what it looks like when someone has altered it. How do they alter it? People don't invent things that never happened. That is too easy to catch. They just lower everything by one level, a little at a time, 1 week a little, the next week a little more. Each individual report doesn't look wrong, but when you place them beside each other over a long enough period, the person in the records becomes a completely different person from the one in real life." She pointed at the notebook. "Your sister on paper is someone who can't walk, can't write, can't speak, and needs someone else to decide everything for her. Your sister in real life isn't like that. I've spent almost a year with her, I know." Cassian looked at the notebook. He thought about the Monday mornings, about the files placed on the library table at 7 o'clock, about the way he always signed the final page without reading more than the first 2 because he trusted the people he paid to do their jobs. "Why didn't you give this to me sooner?" he said. But the moment the words left his mouth, he understood, and Josie knew he understood too, so she only answered softly. "I found out a long time ago, Mr. Vitali. I just didn't have the power to say it." Outside, the rain had stopped. Cassian closed the notebook, placed his hand over the cover, and remained silent. In 15 years, he had learned that when one number didn't match, it was usually because someone had made a mistake. but when every number failed to match in the same direction, then no one was mistaken anymore. At that point, there was only one question left: who benefited? The invitation came on Thursday afternoon, through a middleman Cassian hadn't seen since his father's funeral, and it was worded in the kind of way that made it clear this wasn't an invitation. Dinner at a restaurant on Taylor Street, 8 o'clock, closed to the public. Mr. Kerrigan wished to speak privately. Rowan Pike stood beside the car and said exactly what he thought, that walking alone into a closed restaurant was something his father would never have done. My father also never intended to walk away from this, Cassian replied. You stay here. If I bring you with me, he'll think I'm afraid of him. If he thinks I'm afraid, he'll test me. I go alone to save time for both sides. The restaurant was dark, with only one row of ceiling lights turned on. All the chairs flipped upside down on every table except for one at the far end of the room. Ambrose Kerrigan sat there, a man in his 60s with large hands and a face that time had stripped of every unnecessary expression. He stood when Cassian arrived, shook his hand, and motioned toward the chair. Two other men stood near the kitchen, not eating, not sitting. Cassian took his phone from his pocket and placed it on the table, face down. Kerrigan glanced at the gesture and gave a quiet laugh. Your father used to do that too, he said. He said putting the phone on the table was a way of telling the other person that no one was listening. But really, it was to let the other person know he wasn't pressing anything beneath the table. What do you want to talk about? You're selling Pier 7. I'm transferring it into a registered transportation contract. Same thing. Kerrigan slowly turned his glass of wine without drinking. Do you know how many years the other 4 families have been moving goods through there? Since back when your father still had to borrow shoes. You sign one piece of paper on that contract, and you close something that a lot of people have depended on to survive. Those people will find another door. Of course they will. Kerrigan nodded slowly, but they will remember who closed the old one. There was a silence. One of the 2 men near the kitchen shifted his weight. Cassian didn't turn around. Let me tell you something, Kerrigan continued, his voice warmer now, almost sympathetic. Your father understood something you haven't understood yet. You don't own that pier. You only hold the key for someone else. It was given to him, he handed it to you, and one day you'll hand it to someone else. None of us truly own anything. We're only caretakers. Cassian looked directly at him. He let the silence stretch long enough for the entire room to feel it. Then he said, Then I'll return the key, but I'll keep the lock. Kerrigan stopped turning the glass. Say that again? If you want the key, take it. I don't need it anymore. But that pier is under my name. The documents carry my name, and I keep the lock. Starting next month, anyone who wants to use it goes through the registration office, with a name, a code, and an invoice. You can oversee it as much as you want. The only difference is that now you're overseeing something everyone can see. Kerrigan stared at him for a long time. One of the men near the kitchen stepped forward half a pace, then stopped when the old man lifted 2 fingers from the table. You're more like your mother than I thought, Kerrigan said. Your father was stubborn. Your mother was the one who knew how to lose if it meant she wouldn't have to serve anyone. He lifted his glass, took a sip, and placed it back down. Eat. The fish here is well prepared. Cassian didn't eat. He stayed another 40 minutes, talked about things that didn't matter, allowed the old man to end the dinner in the way he wanted, then stood up, picked up his phone, and walked out. No one stopped him at the door. Outside, the street was cold and damp. His car was still exactly where he had left it, and he sat inside for about a minute before starting the engine, both hands resting on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. He arrived back at the estate close to 3 o'clock in the morning. The gate opened, gravel cracked beneath the tires, and when he turned around the final bend, he saw it. The kitchen window was still lit. He stopped the car in the driveway and didn't turn off the engine immediately. Through the glass, beneath the warm glow of the old ceiling light he had never noticed existed, there were 2 figures sitting at the table. One person was speaking. The other was waiting. Cassian didn't use any of the names on the list of specialists that the estate office continued sending him every quarter. He called an old friend on the hospital board directly and asked for a name that had no connection whatsoever to his family, and that name was Dr. Eleanor Kessler, a woman in her 60s who headed neurological rehabilitation at a university hospital on the north side of the city, someone who had never accepted a consulting contract from any family in Chicago. She arrived on Tuesday morning, bringing 2 assistants and a suitcase of equipment, and the first thing she did when she entered the room was walk over to Della, lower herself to the girl's eye level, and ask permission before touching anything. Cassian realized that not one specialist in the past 14 months had ever done that. Kessler asked Della who she wanted to stay in the room. Della didn't answer with words. She turned her head and looked toward the doorway, where Josie was standing in the hallway, and the doctor nodded. Then she comes in, Kessler said. As for you, that's her decision. Della looked at her brother for a moment, then nodded. The evaluation lasted nearly 2 hours. Cassian sat in the corner of the room and didn't say a single word. He watched his sister stand up from the chair without pushing herself up, walk the full length of the room, touch the opposite wall, and return. Then the doctor asked if she wanted to do it again, and Della did it again. He watched her hold a pen, and during the short stretch of time it took the clock on the wall to move forward, she wrote more than a dozen words on the lined paper, slowly, unevenly, but every single one of them readable. He heard her speak more individual words than all the reports had ever recorded combined. There were moments when she stopped in the middle of a sentence and her hand tightened because she couldn't find the word, and Kessler didn't rush her, didn't speak for her. She simply waited, and Josie sitting beside her did the same, and Cassian sitting in the corner learned once again the lesson he had learned on the carpet in the foyer. When everything ended, Della was tired, the real exhaustion of someone who had used every bit of strength she had, not the emptiness of someone who had given up, and she lay down with Pip beside her without anyone needing to tell her to. Kessler stepped into the hallway. She didn't waste time softening her words. She lifted the file Cassian had sent her beforehand, the file containing nearly a year of weekly reports, and tapped her finger against the cover. Mr. Vitale, I will speak carefully, because I've only met this patient once, but I need to tell you something directly. She looked at him. The distance between what I just saw in that room and what this file records is not a measurement error. Are you sure? Errors go in both directions, she said. Some weeks record things as better than reality, some weeks record things as worse. That's how errors work in every medical facility in the world. This only moves in one direction, from beginning to end, without a single exception. Cassian said nothing. I will send you an official report this week, with methods, data, my signature, and the signatures of 2 colleagues. As for why it happened this way, that's not my field, and I don't have enough evidence to say. I only give you the data. She closed her case. What you do with it is your decision. Then she left. Cassian remained alone in the second-floor hallway, holding the file in his hands, and he heard Josie's footsteps approaching behind him. Do you want to know something else? She said. He turned around. Josie didn't speak immediately. She walked ahead of him down the stairs, into the grand foyer, and stopped at the edge of the carpet. Have you ever wondered why it's always this place? She said. This entire house is huge. There are sitting rooms, a reading room, and her own room upstairs that is much warmer. But every night she insists on coming down here. Exactly here. She won't move even half a meter. Cassian looked at the carpet. I thought she liked the chandelier. Josie lifted her head and pointed toward the ceiling. Cassian followed her gaze. In the corner of the ceiling, right where the dome met the decorative molding, there was a small white object built into the structure, something he had walked beneath almost every day of his life. This is the only place in the house where one camera captures her entire body and the entire floor, Josie said quietly. Her room doesn't have that. The hallway only catches half of her. It took me months to understand. She doesn't come down here because of the chandelier. Cassian didn't move. She can't speak, Josie said. She can't write long sentences. No one believes her. So she does the only thing left. She chooses the place where someone can see her. Then every night she sits there and does the things the papers on your desk said she couldn't do. Cassian sat down, not in a chair. He sat directly on the edge of the carpet, in the middle of his own foyer, both hands resting on his knees, and in the past 14 months, it was the first time he cried. Not because his sister was sick. He had already cried for that. Cried everything he had, in the hospital, in the car, alone. This time he cried because for nearly an entire year, beneath his own roof, beneath the chandelier he passed every day, there had been a 19-year-old girl who couldn't speak, fighting by herself, a little more each night, to prove to the world that she was still there. and the only person who noticed was a woman who cleaned floors whose name he couldn't even remember. That night, after Della was asleep and the entire house had gone dark, Josie found Cassian in the library and told him there was one more thing. "Do you know who empties the waste paper in the estate office?" she asked. "I don't think I've ever asked myself that question." "No one. Mrs. Sutcliffe does it herself." Cassian looked up. "Every other room has someone who cleans it. Your room, the sitting room, the dining room, even your sister's room. Only the office is different. She locks the door and carries the paper bag out herself, takes it to the bin in the yard herself, and doesn't let anyone touch it. For almost a year that I've worked here, not a single day was missed." She pulled a piece of paper folded into quarters from her pocket, a printed document with one corner crumpled and the edge cut at an angle, the way paper looks when it gets stuck inside a printer and someone pulls it out. One night the bag tore. I picked it up for her. She grabbed it back very quickly, but this piece fell under the desk and she didn't see it. I was going to throw it away, then I looked at the heading. Cassian opened it. The upper half contained an italicized line of German text. Beneath it, a string of characters and several lines that were cut off halfway because the page had printed incorrectly. He couldn't read German, but he recognized the form of what he was holding. It was the header of a financial document. "Why did you keep it?" "Because I clean this entire house, and I know there is no one here who speaks German," Josie said. Everett Lang arrived at the estate at 7 o'clock the next morning, bringing 2 people from his office with him. Cassian handed him the piece of paper and said only one sentence: "Find where it leads." It took 9 days. On the afternoon of the 9th day, Everett spread everything across the library table, and he began by pushing aside the thickest folder. "I won't make you read this," he said. "I'll only tell you 2 things. The first is that a large amount of money from the family trust was prepared to be transferred overseas, with the destination being a private neurological institute in Zurich, listed under the name of long-term treatment expenses." He placed a document in front of Cassian. "The second is that at the other end of the transaction, the person who signed the formation documents was Camille Sutcliffe." Cassian looked at the name. He said nothing. "And this," Everett said, "is the thing that kept me awake last night." He pushed over a much thinner folder. "A draft petition for legal guardianship of Delaney Vitale. It hasn't been filed, but the file metadata shows when it was created." Cassian opened it and looked at the date, and he had to read it twice. "This is dated before the accident. 3 weeks before," Everett said. The library remained silent for a very long time. Rowan stood beside the door and didn't move. Cassian placed the papers down, then spoke, his voice flat in the way it always became when he was angriest. "So she didn't take advantage of the accident. She had already prepared everything beforehand, and the accident simply happened to give her the tool she needed to carry it out." "I'm afraid that's the case. But for what purpose?" Cassian asked. "If she wanted money, she had a dozen quieter ways to get it. Why my sister?" Everett removed his glasses, wiped them, and put them back on. "Because your father's will had an exclusion clause," he said. "A name removed from every inheritance right, permanently, without exception. I read that document 3 times, and I still believe it was written by someone who wanted to make absolutely certain no one could find a way around it." He tapped his finger against the thin folder. "Except for one opening. If Delaney is declared legally incapacitated and someone is appointed as a co-guardian, that person gains voting authority over her share of the trust assets. That is the only way left for a name that was removed to return to this house." "What name?" Cassian asked. Everett hesitated. "I haven't finished verifying it. I won't say it until I'm certain." Cassian stood and walked toward the window. Behind him, Rowan spoke, and it was something Rowan rarely did when he wasn't asked. "Give me 20 minutes, and I'll have her out of the gate by this afternoon." "No, sir." "I said no." Cassian turned around. "Listen carefully. If I remove her today, what do I get? I get satisfaction for about an hour. And what do I lose? I lose everything she's still hiding. Once she walks out the gate, she erases everything. Everyone still connected to this disappears, and the name in that will becomes something I may never find." He looked at Everett. "I need enough that no one can argue against it, not enough to make myself feel better." "Then what are you going to do?" "I wait," Cassian said. "She stays exactly where she is. She keeps bringing files to my desk every Monday morning. She keeps believing I don't know anything, and I keep gathering enough. It was a decision. He made it with complete awareness, on a quiet afternoon, with every piece of information laid out in front of him, and 11 days later, he would pay the price for it. The flight to New York took off at 5 o'clock in the morning, and Cassian left the estate at 3:15 with Rowan driving. He was going because that meeting was the final link he needed for the Pier 7 file, and he had calculated that he would be back before nightfall. It was the 11th night since the afternoon he decided to wait. At 3:40, the gate alarm rang. Josie was sitting with Della in the kitchen. She walked into the hallway, looked at the gate camera screen, and saw a white medical transport vehicle parked outside, its roof lights turned off. 3 people in uniforms standing beside the already opened rear door. The night nurse scheduled for that evening had called in sick that afternoon, and Josie remembered that Mrs. Sutcliffe herself had approved the leave request. She opened the gate because if she didn't, they had the code anyway. The man in front held out a folder. Emergency transfer order for patient Delaney Vitale. It has a doctor's signature and the receiving facility code. We're taking her now. Josie took the folder, and she felt her heartbeat inside her ears. She called Cassian. No signal. He was on his way to the airport, and that stretch of highway had always had unstable reception. She called emergency services. The operator took the information, asked for the address, and said the nearest patrol unit would arrive in approximately 15 minutes. Josie put the phone down and made a calculation very quickly in her head. From the house to the gate, getting someone into the vehicle, closing the door, backing onto the main road. 4 minutes, maybe less. She didn't have 15 minutes, she only had 4, so she did the only thing left. She pressed the recording button on her phone, placed it face down on the hallway table, and stood blocking the doorway. Before you take anyone out of this house, she said, I need to read the entire order. That's procedure. You wait. Who are you? I'm the person holding your paperwork. She opened the file and began reading every line aloud, slowly, clearly, with the voice of someone who had spent years working night shifts in hospitals and knew exactly what a patient transfer form was supposed to contain. She read the name of the receiving facility. She read the order code. She read the name of the receiving facility. 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 She read the professional license number printed beneath the signature and spoke every digit aloud, one by one. The man in front shifted his weight. Can you read faster? I'm reading at my own pace. The second man began stepping onto the porch. Josie didn't move back. Stop right there, she said, because I just reached the final line, and I have a question that I think you also want answered before you do anything else. She tapped her finger against the paper. It says here that the patient agreed to the transfer, correct? No one answered. Delaney Vitale is 19 years old. She is an adult. No court has declared her legally incapacitated. No one has been appointed as her guardian. You can check. Court records are public. She lifted her eyes and looked directly at the man in front. That means the only signature with legal authority on this document is her own signature. Not the doctor's, not the house manager's, not her brother's, hers. The man glanced at the person beside him. We have an order. Who issued it? Silence. I'll ask again, Josie said. Who signed this, and is that person here? Because if you remove an adult woman with full legal capacity from her own home without her consent, then what you're doing is no longer patient transportation, and I've been recording from the beginning. She tilted her head toward the phone lying face down on the hallway table. The third person stepped back half a pace. She can't speak, the man in front said. Who told you that? Josie asked. Then she turned her head toward the space behind her. Della. At the end of the hallway, beneath the wall lights, Delaney Vitale stood there. She had come down the stairs by herself, walked the entire length of the hallway on her own, and stood upright, both hands hanging at her sides, without Pip in her arms this time. She stared at the 3 men on the porch for a long moment. The entire house was so quiet that the sound of the vehicle engine still running outside the gate could be heard. Then she opened her mouth. It took her a while. Later, Cassian would listen to that recording many times and count exactly how long that silence lasted, and he would never tell anyone how many times he had to stop halfway through because of what he heard. No, Della said. Clear, complete, go. No one moved. At that exact moment, Josie's phone vibrated on the table. She picked it up, turned on speaker, and held it in front of the three men. Cassian Vitali's voice filled the hallway. Not loud, not rushed, steady, like someone reading numbers aloud. The three of you are standing on my property at nearly 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't care who paid you, and I don't need to ask. I only have one question. Are you planning to drive yourselves out of here while you still can? The man in front snatched the folder from Josie's hand, turned around, and walked down the steps. The rear door of the vehicle slammed shut. 40 seconds later, the taillights disappeared beyond the trees at the gate. Josie stood there for another moment before realizing her hands were shaking. She turned back. Della was still standing in the same place at the end of the hallway, and the girl looked at her, then said one more word, much softer. Stay. Josie walked over and sat down on the step beside her. Yes, she said. I'll stay. Cassian canceled the flight and turned the car around right on the highway. He returned to the estate at 5 o'clock in the morning, went straight upstairs, looked at his sister sleeping, then went down to the library and sat there until daylight fully arrived. After that, he summoned the nurse. She arrived at 10 o'clock, sat down in the chair across from the library desk, and Cassian didn't ask her a single question during the first 2 minutes. He simply laid everything out in front of her one piece at a time, slowly, like someone laying down cards. Copies of 3 reports with her signatures, a bank statement, Dr. Kessler's official evaluation, stamped and sealed. Then he picked up the final paper, the one whose contents she hadn't seen yet, folded it in half, and pushed it toward her. I won't use this paper, he said. I just want you to know that I have it. The nurse looked at the folded paper sitting between them. She didn't open it. She began to cry, and then she spoke, and she gave him a name. By noon, Rowan knocked on the library door. Sir, Mrs. Sutcliffe would like to see you. Camille walked in carrying the morning files like she did every day. But this time she didn't place them on the desk. She stood there and spoke in the calm voice Josie had described. I heard there was an incident at the house last night. I'm sorry I wasn't present. Cassian didn't respond. I also heard you recently spoke with a former medical employee, she continued. I'm not asking you about that, but I think before you believe anything someone tells you, you should look at a few things. She placed 3 sheets of paper on the desk. 3 payments made into Ms. Marlowe's account over the past 3 months. The source is a company that no one here has ever heard of. She placed down a printed photograph. It showed Josie inside Della's room, holding his sister's necklace in her hand. Then she placed down a thicker file, and she slid it toward Rowan instead of Cassian, a small gesture whose meaning he would only understand much later. I have kept this for a long time, Camille said. I was still planning not to show it, but last night she gave herself the authority to stand at the door of this house and make decisions for you, so I think you should know who she is. Rowan opened the file. It was the record of a workplace accident at Pier 9, which happened 3 years earlier, at a construction site owned by the Vitali family. 1 worker had died. The case had been settled outside court with a payment and a confidentiality agreement signed by the family. Rowan read down to the victim's name, then slowly lifted his head. Elias Ward, he said. On the next page, under the contact information section, was the name Josephine Marlowe, and beside it the relationship listed as fiancé. Camille said nothing more. She only inclined her head in greeting and walked out, closing the door very gently, exactly as she always did. Cassian sat in silence for a very long time. He thought about the first night he stood at the edge of the foyer and looked down at the carpet. He thought about what she had said in South Lawndale, that there were some things people walked away from not because they lacked money. He thought about the blue-covered notebook and the unfinished printed page, about the way every clue in this house had come from one person, and he thought about the thing 15 years in his father's world had taught him until it became instinct. There were no coincidences. There were arrangements, and there were people who were so good at arranging things that they made others believe they had simply been lucky. He summoned Josie at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She entered the library, looked at the open file on the desk, and he saw her face change when she reached the name. She read for a very long time. Then she looked up, and the thing that would hurt him most about that moment later was that she didn't immediately try to argue. I didn't know, she said. 3 years ago, I was only told it was a contractor. They gave me papers. I signed them. I needed money for my mother's medical bills, And I signed that document in a hospital hallway. I never knew that construction site belonged to anyone. You worked as a caregiver at the hospital, Cassian said. Then you left. Then you applied for a night shift housekeeper position at this exact house, because it paid more and it had night hours so I could take my brother to school in the morning. What about those 3 payments? I don't know where they came from. I don't have any account except my payroll account. Cassian stood up and turned toward the window, and when he spoke, his voice had returned to its familiar flatness. I need you to leave here today. Behind him there was a long silence. You don't believe me, she said. I don't have enough reason to believe anyone right now. You do. She said it very softly. You have the notebook. You have the paper. You have the recording from last night. You have all of those things because I gave them to you. He didn't turn around. Do you want to know what she is planning? Josie said. She doesn't need you to believe her. She only needs you to stop believing me. And you just did exactly what she needed you to do. Then she walked out, and this time she didn't close the door gently. She left it open. She returned to the library close to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when her bags had already been placed outside in the hallway and the taxi had been called. Cassian was still sitting in the same place. I want to ask you for one last thing, Josie said. Then I'll leave. He looked up. She created 3 payments and a photograph. I want to know what else she created that you haven't told me about. The night I left here, I left my keys on this table. If she fabricated something else along with it, I have the right to know what I'm being accused of. Cassian looked at her for a moment. Then he reached inside his coat, pulled out his wallet, opened the innermost compartment, and took out the folded piece of paper, the paper he had carried with him all those weeks and had never shown anyone. He placed it on the table and pushed it toward her. She didn't need to fabricate anything else, he said. You left this behind. Josie opened it. She looked at it for about 3 seconds. Then she spoke, and there was no defensiveness in her voice at all, only the pure confusion of someone who had just seen something she didn't understand. This isn't my handwriting. Cassian stood up. What did you say? I didn't write this. She placed the paper down on the table and turned it toward him. Look at the letter here. Look at the hook at the end. I don't write that way. I've written my letters the same way since school, and I never press down that hard when I write. I was a caregiver. I wrote medical records all night. If I pressed that hard, my hand would ache. She stepped back half a pace. Go get any paper I've ever signed in this house. My payroll records, my shift logs, the blue notebook I gave you last week. Compare them. Cassian didn't need to go get anything. The blue-covered notebook was already sitting on the table, less than a hand's width away. He opened it, placed it beside the paper, and looked at the 2 side by side beneath the desk lamp. The handwriting in the blue notebook was small, even, slightly slanted to the right, every letter consistent with the next, the strokes thin and light. The handwriting on the paper was larger, trembling, the letters uneven, some tall and some short, and every stroke pressed down so hard that the marks showed through on the back of the page. It was the handwriting of someone who had to use an enormous amount of force just to keep the pen moving along the right path. Cassian stood there, and he felt the floor beneath his feet begin to disappear. He had looked at this paper countless times. He had opened it in the car, in meeting rooms, in the library at 3 o'clock in the morning, and not once had he asked the simplest question. The night you left, he said, and he had to stop to catch his breath. Where did you pack your things? In the staff room downstairs. Was anyone there with you? No. Josie looked at him, but she came down. She stood in the doorway watching me pack. I told her to go back to her room because it was late. She didn't leave. She stood there for a while, then walked away. I thought she was upset. Cassian sat down in the chair. He looked at the 6 words on the table, and he read them again, as if it were the first time in his life, and this time they meant something completely different. They weren't the words of a housekeeper asking him not to abandon the girl she cared for. They were the words of a 19-year-old girl who, after 14 months without speaking a single word, had waited until the entire house was asleep, had walked downstairs by herself, had taken a piece of paper and a pen, and had used the right hand that people claimed had lost functional writing ability to write 6 words. Then she placed them on the library table. Not the kitchen table, not the hallway, the library table, where her brother would sit the next morning, the one place in that house where she knew for certain he would see them. After 14 months, that was the first sentence his sister had spoken to him. and he had read it almost every day, believing it belonged to someone else. "Mr. Vitale," Josie said softly. He didn't answer. Outside, there was the sound of a taxi horn at the gate. She stood there for another moment, then picked up her bag and walked out, and Cassian didn't call her back because he couldn't find a single sentence kind enough to say at that moment. The library door closed. He sat alone with the paper in his hand, beneath the desk lamp, and upstairs there was a girl waiting to see what he would do this time. Della knew before anyone had the chance to tell her. That evening, she didn't come downstairs to the foyer. She didn't go to the dining table. Food trays were brought up to her room and brought back down untouched, and by the second night, Cassian ordered every appointment on his schedule for the week to be cancelled. Della lay facing the wall, holding Pip the teddy bear in her arms, and she didn't speak. It wasn't that she refused to speak. The thing that had returned over the past 11 weeks simply disappeared, like a door closing from the inside. The doctor came, examined her, and said that physically there was nothing new, that this was a common reaction, that it would take time. Cassian listened to everything, then told them to leave. That night, he carried a pillow down to his sister's room, leaned his back against the foot of her bed, and sat there. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask if she was okay, didn't explain, didn't apologize, didn't make promises. He simply sat there, and when morning came, he folded the pillow and walked out. The second night, he did the exact same thing. On the third night, close to 2 a.m, he heard the blanket moving behind him. He didn't turn around. There was the sound of bare feet touching the floor, the sound of the desk drawer opening, the sound of paper. Then the desk lamp turned on. Cassian remained exactly where he was, facing the door, and behind him he heard the sound of a pen moving across paper, stopping, then moving again. In the morning, there was a crumpled sheet of paper on the desk and another one still unfinished. The next day was the same, and the day after that, he didn't read them. He only watched the trash bin beside her desk slowly fill up, with crumpled papers, some discarded after only a few words had been written. On the fourth day, Della handed him a sealed envelope. She didn't offer it by holding it out. She placed it in his hand, held his hand for 1 second, then let go. On the envelope there was only one word, written large, pressed down heavily. Cassian called for the car. The boy opened the door to apartment number 7, still holding the subway route map, and this time he recognized him immediately. "My sister is at work," Beck said. "She won't be home until tomorrow night." Cassian handed him the envelope. "Give this to your sister for me. Make sure she gets it directly." Beck took it, looked carefully at the name written on the front, then nodded seriously. "I'll put it on her pillow. My sister always looks at her pillow first." Then he waved and closed the door. Josie returned home after her night shift the following morning, close to 7 o'clock. She had taken her old hospital job back that same week, working patient transport, the exact shift she had done years before. She took off her shoes at the door, walked into the room, and saw the envelope placed neatly in the middle of her pillow. She opened it right there, standing, without even removing her coat. Inside was a sheet of lined paper. The handwriting was large, slanted, uneven, with places where words had been erased and rewritten so many times that the paper had become worn thin. "Sister Josie, I don't remember my mother's face anymore, but I remember your voice. Please don't let me forget that too." Josie finished reading it, then she read it again. She walked into the hallway and sat down on the floor right beside the bedroom door, her back against the wall, holding the paper with both hands. In the kitchen, the kettle Beck had boiled before going to sleep was still warm. Outside the window, the washing machines on the ground floor began their first loads of the day. She sat there for a very long time. Josie didn't return to the estate. She placed the letter in the kitchen drawer, slept for 3 hours, then woke up and began doing the things she had been thinking about ever since the afternoon she was fired. She didn't go looking for Cassian. She went looking for records. What she needed was inside the archive system of the hospital where Della had been treated during those first months, and she knew exactly what it was, the initial functional assessment, the original one. The document created the moment the patient was transferred from intensive care to the rehabilitation department, before any weekly reports from the estate existed. If that original document was different from what had been rewritten in the files Mrs. Sutcliffe brought to the library desk every Monday morning, then everything afterward would collapse. But the medical records of an adult patient couldn't be taken by just anyone, not a brother, not a house manager, not a family attorney, only the person herself, or someone she had authorized in writing. Josie wrote a short letter and sent it to the estate, not to Cassian, but to Delaney Vitale, along with the medical record release authorization form she had obtained from the hospital reception desk. In the letter, she wrote only one paragraph, that this was her right, that no one could sign on her behalf, and that if she didn't want to do it, she could simply leave it there, and Josie would never ask again. 3 days later, an envelope was delivered to apartment number 7. Inside was the form. On the signature line, the name Delaney Vitale was written in large, slanted letters, pressed down heavily, written 3 times on 3 draft pages attached behind it, because the first 2 attempts had slipped away from the lines. It was the first signature of her life as an adult making her own decision about her own affairs, and no one in that house knew she had signed it. Josie brought it to the hospital on Thursday morning. She stood in line at the records desk like everyone else, submitted the request, showed her identification as the authorized representative, and waited 4 hours on a plastic chair in the hallway. The woman at the desk was named Marguerite, had worked there for nearly 30 years, and she recognized Josie from the years when she used to push night shift hospital stretchers. She didn't break any rules. She only did her job a little faster than usual, and before handing the file through the glass window, she said one thing to her. Be careful, when someone goes looking for this kind of record, it usually means someone else is looking too. Josie sat down right there in the hospital hallway and opened it. The original assessment was 7 pages long. She reached the 3rd page and had to put it down for a moment. There, from the very first weeks, the rehabilitation physician had written that the patient maintained full cognitive ability, fully understood language, had an injury limited to the speech production area, and had a favorable prognosis for language recovery with continuous intervention. There was not a single line stating loss of capacity, not a single line stating complete dependence. The original document and the weekly reports Cassian had continued signing on the final page were 2 stories about 2 completely different people. Josie went to the post office that same afternoon. She made 3 copies. She kept one. She sent one to Dr. Eleanor Kessler's office, along with a handwritten page stating clearly that these records had been legally released through authorization from the patient herself, including a copy of the authorization form. The 3rd copy she placed in a drawer and sent nowhere. She didn't send anything to Cassian Vitale. That evening, after Beck had fallen asleep, she sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of tea and said out loud the sentence she had been repeating in her mind all day. I don't need him to believe me. I need the truth to exist in the records. Then she sat there for a while longer, and while she sat, her thoughts kept drifting back to that house, to the endless nights spent walking through its hallways, to the tiny details that only someone who cleaned the rooms would notice. And one detail suddenly rose above the others. In the grand foyer, on the eastern wall, there was a portrait of Cassian's father. Josie never had to clean it, not because it was too high, but because every time she carried a cloth toward it, it was already spotless. One late autumn morning, she left her shift later than usual, and she saw a young man there, someone from the maintenance team, standing on a folding ladder with a soft cloth in his hand, wiping the picture frame very slowly, every edge carefully. She greeted him. He didn't answer, and he didn't turn around. She had thought he was rude and forgot about it the next day. Now, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of tea, she suddenly remembered what day it had been. It was the 1st anniversary of his death. He came to the library on a Monday night, without going through Rowan, without asking for an appointment. He knocked twice, then stood waiting in the doorway, and when Cassian looked up, for a moment he didn't recognize the person standing there. Then he did. The young maintenance worker, the one who still changed hallway lights at night, the one Cassian had walked past countless times without ever asking his name. I need to speak with you, sir, he said. Alone. Cassian motioned for Rowan to leave. The young man placed a small hard drive on the library table and a thin file inside a plastic sleeve. This is the hallway camera drive from the 2nd floor, he said. The original drive. I was ordered to replace it one night this spring, and I did. But I didn't destroy the old one. I took it home and kept it in a cabinet. Cassian looked at the hard drive. And this, the young man said, placing his hand on the file, is the original technical assessment of the vehicle, the complete version, with photographs and conclusions. It was removed from the family records and replaced with a summary. I kept the original. Cassian stood up very slowly. Who are you? Thaddeus, the man said. Thaddeus Sutcliffe. The silence in the library lasted long enough for the clock in the hallway to be heard. Mrs. Camille is my mother, Thaddeus said. And your father was my father. Cassian didn't sit down. He stood there looking at the young man's face, and he saw what he should have noticed years ago. The shape of the jaw, the way the shoulders fell, the things he still saw every morning in the mirror and in the portrait hanging on the eastern wall. My mother started working here when she was 26, Thaddeus said. I was born here, in the staff room on the lowest floor. I grew up in this house. I know which floorboards creak. I know how to turn the hot water valve on the third floor. I have never eaten a single meal at the dining table upstairs. He said those things without bitterness. He said them like someone reading a list. Your father paid my mother very well. He paid for my education. He did everything except one thing. He never said it out loud. Cassian sat down. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Did you ever ask my name? Cassian had no answer to that. Then why now? He asked. You know this will cost your mother everything. I know. Thaddeus looked down at the table. Do you remember about 2 years ago? There was an afternoon when I was fixing the light in the second-floor hallway, and Delaney walked past. She was 17 years old then. He paused. She called me by my name, not the maintenance guy, not, hey you. She called me Thaddeus. I asked her how she knew my name, and she told me my name was written on the assignment board in the laundry room, that everyone could read it, but no one ever did. Cassian remained silent. Then she said something else. Thaddeus continued. She said, you have the Sutcliffe name. That's a name too. He lifted his head, and for the first time during the entire conversation, his voice changed. My whole life in this house, no one had ever said anything like that to me. Not a single person, not even my mother. Cassian raised his hand to his face and kept it there for a moment. There's one more thing, Thaddeus said. I need to say everything tonight, because if I don't, I won't be able to say it anymore. Say it. The call from the unknown number. The night you came home 2 days early. Cassian lowered his hand. He remembered that call. He had heard it in the lobby of a hotel in New York. A man's voice. One single sentence. Then the line went dead. If you don't come home tonight, your sister won't be there tomorrow morning. He had ordered someone to trace the number. A disposable number, purchased with cash. Impossible to track. He had taken the earliest flight and returned home close to 3 in the morning. It was you, Cassian said. It was me. Why didn't you tell me directly? Would you have believed me? Thaddeus asked. If I had knocked on the library door that night, introduced myself, and said my mother was preparing to take your sister out of the country, would you have believed me? Cassian didn't answer. Both of them knew the answer. I only needed you to come home, Thaddeus said. I thought if you came back early enough, you would see it yourself. And you did. He stood up, pushed the hard drive and the file toward the middle of the table. The drive contains the night she fell on the stairs this spring. Watch it, and you'll understand why it was replaced. And that file? Give it to your lawyer. Don't give it to anyone else. He walked toward the door, then stopped. I didn't do this to get anything from you, he said without turning around. I did it because there was one person in this house who once called me by my real name. Now she can't speak, so it's my turn to speak. The original assessment took 2 days to read and 10 minutes to understand. On the 9th page there was a close-up photograph of a section of the brake fluid line and a conclusion written in the dry language of an engineer, stating that the cut marks were inconsistent with damage caused by wear or impact. Rowan brought back the name on Friday night. Emmett Bray, in his 50s, had driven for the Vitale family since before Cassian's father even owned a single Pier, resigned 2 months before the accident citing health reasons, and in the 6 months afterward had received 3 large cash payments from an intermediary. Rowan traced all the way to Ambrose Kerrigan's doorstep. They found him at a motel outside Joliet. The warehouse stood behind the old Pier district, a large structure with high ceilings, smelling of engine oil and concrete dust. There was a long wooden table in the center and 2 chairs. When Cassian walked in, everyone standing along the walls fell silent, and he knew exactly what they were waiting for. In the house where he had grown up, things like this only ended one way, and everyone inside that warehouse knew the ending by heart. Cassian pulled out a chair and sat at one end of the table. Emmett Bray sat at the other. He didn't look like a murderer. He looked like a man who hadn't slept well for more than a year. "You know why I brought you here," Cassian said. "I do. I'm only asking you one question. You answer it, and that's it." Bray nodded. "Who ordered it?" "Kerrigan's people." There was a very small sound at the far end of the warehouse, someone shifting their stance. Cassian didn't turn around. "Did you know I was in that car?" Bray looked up, and the sentence he said next was the one Cassian would carry with him for the rest of his life. "No one ordered you," Bray said, "and no one ordered the girl. Your father was the only name on the list." Cassian didn't move. "Say that again. Only your father." "They were very specific with me. That exact car, that exact day, because he was driving into the city alone that day. He had been driving alone all week before that. No one knew 2 more people would be in the car." Bray lifted a hand to his face, then lowered it. "I found out when the news came over the radio. I was sitting in my kitchen, and I heard it." "Why my father?" Bray remained silent for a long time. "Because he was planning to pull you out." Cassian didn't understand immediately. The older man saw that, so he explained more clearly, slowly, like someone who had repeated the memory too many times in his own head. 3 months before that day, he had me drive him to several places, law offices and banks. I waited outside the car, but I heard pieces of his phone calls. He was arranging to put everything into official documents: the pier, the warehouses, the contracts. He wanted you to inherit something you could sign your name to in the open. Bray looked down at the table. They didn't want that, but they didn't want you dead either. If you died, the pier would fall into the hands of someone harder to control. Cassian sat perfectly still. What did they want? "They wanted you to stay," Bray said. "A son who buries his father doesn't leave. He stays and guards the house. He hates someone. He thinks he has to become stronger. He tightens his grip even more. He doesn't dare let go of anything, because if he does, then it means his father died for nothing." He looked up. "I heard them say that exact thing. They said, let him sit on top of it with his father's body, and he'll lock himself in." No one spoke inside the warehouse. Cassian looked down at his own hands resting on the wooden table. He thought about the past 14 months. He thought about how tightly he had held on to everything. How many nights he had slept in the library chair facing the hallway. How many times he had stood outside his sister's bedroom door and refused to walk in because walking in meant facing the thing he had caused. He thought about the thought that had lived inside his mind all those days, that he should have been the one sitting in that car. And now he understood that the very thought itself was what someone had paid for. His pain wasn't the consequence, it was the product. It had been ordered, delivered on time, and it had done exactly what someone wanted it to do for more than a year. He sat there for a very long time. No one inside the warehouse dared break the silence. Then Cassian stood, walked to the door, and pushed it open. Cold wind rushed inside. "Rowan!" The other man stepped forward. "Call federal authorities. Tell them we have a witness and the original assessment." Rowan froze. "Sir. And give him your coat. It's cold outside." Rowan looked toward the table, then back at Cassian, lowering his voice. "You're really letting him go?" "I'm letting him live," Cassian said. "Those are 2 different things." He stood in the open doorway, looking out across the yard. "What do you think my father would do tonight?" "You know what he would do." "I do. And 30 years from now, there will be another child sitting silently in another house, and another man will be standing exactly where I am standing now, and he will believe he has no choices left." He turned back toward Rowan. "I'm ending this cycle here. Make the call." Camille Sutcliffe filed the guardianship petition on Tuesday morning, 2 days after Rowan called federal authorities, and Everett Lang said she did it because it was the last move left on the board. If the court declared Delaney incapacitated, then every statement the girl made afterward would lose its value, including anything she said about what had happened inside that house. The hearing opened on Thursday morning at the Cook County Guardianship Court. The courtroom was small, with a low ceiling and wooden benches. Josie arrived alone and sat in the back row. Cassian saw her when he walked in, and he said nothing, only stopping for a second before continuing forward. Della sat between him and Everett, holding Pip the teddy bear in her arms. Camille's attorney was a man named Preston Vale, and he began by saying nothing about Delaney at all. He spoke about Josie. He read aloud the amount of unpaid medical debt she still carried. He read the 3 transfers made into the account under her name. He presented the photograph taken inside Della's room. He mentioned that she had abandoned nursing school, that she worked night shifts in a house owned by someone with a last name known throughout the entire city, and he asked the court a question that he didn't need to answer. Whose word are we relying on to say this young woman still has capacity? Cassian began to stand. Josie was already standing before him. She placed her hand lightly on his hand, only for a moment, then pulled away and stepped forward. Your Honor, may I speak? The judge nodded. Josie turned toward Preston Vale. You are right, counselor. I owe money. I still owe money. I left school because my mother became sick and I had no one to ask for help. I cleaned other people's floors at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I am not ashamed of that. She paused. But for nearly a year inside that house, I was the only person who asked Delaney Vitale what she wanted. Not made decisions for her, not talked about her while she was sitting right there, asked her, then waited until she could answer, no matter how long it took. She looked directly at the attorney. You can calculate my worth, sir. You just did. You calculated every dollar. You read every number correctly. But that other thing, you cannot calculate. Then she returned to her seat. Camille Sutcliffe was called to speak near the end of the morning. She stood in a charcoal-colored suit, her hair pinned neatly the same way it had been for 20 years, and she said 2 sentences. I didn't hurt anyone. I simply didn't save anyone. She looked across the courtroom, passed over Cassian, stopped briefly at the row where her son was sitting, then lowered her eyes. I asked for a name on a piece of paper. Someone gave me a salary. She sat down and said nothing else for the remainder of the hearing. After the lunch recess, Everett Lang stood and informed the court that his client wished to make a statement herself. Preston Vale objected. The judge dismissed the objection with a short sentence, saying that anyone facing a declaration of incapacity had the right to speak before the court, and that was precisely why this hearing existed. Delaney Vitale stood. She was still holding Pip. She walked 3 steps away from the row of seats and stood there, facing the bench, and the entire courtroom fell silent. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Preston Vale leaned back slightly. Delaney tried again. A sound escaped, then disappeared immediately. She lowered her eyes, breathed in, and Cassian in the front row gripped the edge of the wooden bench so tightly that his knuckles turned white. No one reminded her. No one spoke for her. Everett didn't say a word. Josie in the back row remained completely still. The silence lasted so long that the court clerk stopped typing. Then she spoke. I'm not insane. Her voice was rough, slow, each word separated from the next by a pause. But it was clear. I only lost my voice. She lifted her eyes and looked directly at the bench. Those 2 things are not the same. She stood there for 1 more second, then returned to her seat. On the other side of the courtroom, Thaddeus Sutcliffe raised his hand to cover his eyes and kept it there. Camille Sutcliffe didn't look at anyone. She stared down at her hands resting in her lap, and for the rest of the hearing, she never looked up again. The judge took 40 minutes to deliberate. When she returned, she didn't read a long statement. She looked at Delaney and said 1 sentence before delivering the ruling. Ms. Vitale, this court heard you, and this court sees no reason to take away the right you just exercised in front of it. The guardianship petition was denied in full. The file was transferred to prosecutors for review of potential guardianship fraud and falsification of medical records. Camille Sutcliffe was suspended from all duties related to the family trust that same afternoon. Outside the courthouse, when almost everyone had already left, Cassian found Josie standing beside the window waiting for the elevator. He didn't know how to begin. She looked at him first. She did it herself, she said. Not you. Not me. I know, Cassian said. Then he added with much more difficulty, I was wrong. About you. Josie looked out the window for a long time. I know, she said. What came afterward happened quickly and quietly. The files Cassian handed to federal authorities triggered an entire chain of events, and Ambrose Kerrigan was indicted before winter ended, along with 3 others whose names had once made half the city lower their voices. Cassian sold 2 ports. He publicly revealed the accident at Pier 9, canceled every confidentiality agreement, fully compensated every family that had been forced into silence 3 years earlier, and accepted every penalty imposed by regulators. After that spring, the Vitale family was nearly half the size it had been on the day his father died. Thaddeus Sutcliffe was officially recognized, given back the family name his father had never dared write down, and he accepted it the way he accepted everything else in his life, without celebrations, without announcements. The Pip House Foundation was established in April, dedicated to people who were caring alone for seriously ill family members, with a free legal support line for families being threatened through guardianship procedures. As for Josie, she returned to nursing school through a scholarship she applied for through the normal process, and Cassian removed his name from the review board before her application was ever opened. On a Saturday afternoon at the beginning of June, there were 4 people sitting on the floor of the grand foyer at the estate. Della sat in the middle of the carpet, building a tower with wooden blocks, her right hand much steadier than it had been during the winter. Beck sat across from her, the folded subway route map tucked into his jacket pocket, and the boy was seriously arguing that the blue block had to go beneath the yellow block or the tower would collapse. "No," Della said. She spoke slowly, but she spoke the entire sentence. "Blue is heavier. Look, they're the same size." "They're not." Beck picked up both blocks, weighed them in his hands, then made the face of someone who had lost but wasn't ready to admit it. Josie sat on the edge of the carpet with her legs stretched out, and she laughed, the laugh of someone who no longer had to hold anything back. Cassian knelt among the wooden blocks, his sleeves rolled up, trying to build a wider foundation, and both of them told him at the same time that he was doing it wrong. Above them, the chandelier was turned to its lowest setting as it always was. No one stood on the staircase landing watching anymore. The tower fell. Della laughed. Beck shouted that it was Uncle Cassian's fault. Josie picked up the wooden block that rolled to her feet, placed it into Della's hand, and said nothing. That night, after Beck had fallen asleep in the upstairs guest room and Della had gone to her bedroom, Josie walked past the library. The door was open. The wool blanket was still folded neatly over the arm of the chair, exactly where it had always been, and it hadn't been touched. The armchair was facing the fireplace. She stood there for a moment, then realized the room had changed, and she remembered that someone had mentioned the week before that the master had ordered the second-floor bedding replaced. "You started sleeping in your own room again," she said when she heard footsteps behind her. "For a few weeks now." Cassian walked in and stopped a short distance away. He took out his wallet, and from the innermost compartment, he removed the piece of paper that had been folded in half, its 4 corners now worn. "I still want to ask you one question," he said. "I know who wrote this now, so this isn't that question." Josie looked at the paper. "Then what is it?" "The night you left," he said. "You didn't leave anything behind, not a single word. You left the keys and you walked away. Why?" Josie was silent for a long time. "Because I thought about it," she said. "I sat down at the table in the staff room and picked up a pen. I was going to write to you, write that she could do more than what the report said, write that you should go upstairs and see for yourself, write that there was someone in that house who didn't want her to get better." She gave a very small shrug. "Then I put the pen down." "Why?" "Because if I wrote any more, I wouldn't be able to leave," she said. "And I had to leave. Every sentence I added would become another reason for me to stay, and I wasn't allowed to have any reasons. So I put the keys down and walked out the door without looking back." Cassian looked at her. Then he held out the paper. "Take it. This belongs to her. She told me to give it to you. I asked." Josie took it. She opened it, read those 6 words again. "Don't leave. I am still here." And this time she read them with the exact meaning they had always carried. "Next time, write more," Cassian said. "You have time." Josie folded the paper along the same old creases and placed it inside her coat pocket. Outside the library window, the second-floor hallway lights were still left on every night, and no one in that house felt the need to turn them off anymore. This story leaves behind 3 simple truths. First, being present beside someone matters far more than trying to fix them. The richest man in the city spent an entire fortune on specialists, but the thing that opened the door was a person willing to sit on the floor and wait. Second, losing a voice does not mean losing dignity. A person remains whole even when they cannot express what they want, and our responsibility is to ask them, not decide for them. Third, the most important person in our lives is sometimes the one we pass every day without ever truly seeing, without ever asking their name. Look closely at the people who quietly remain beside you while there is still time. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, press like, and share, so that every day more meaningful stories can be brought to you. How did you feel about today's story, and what part of it made you think of someone in your own life? Please leave a few words in the comments. We truly hope to hear the emotions that come from the deepest places in your heart. We wish you and your family lasting health, happiness, and peace every day. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next video.